Your tech pack will most likely be a working document as you're going back and forth in the fit process, back and forth with comments on color and placement.
Do you have a brilliant product idea but don't know where to start to get it made? Or are you looking to level up your product but afraid to take it overseas?
If so, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jackie.
And I'm Erin, and we are
the Sourcing Gals,
your trusted guides to everything you need to know about sourcing, manufacturing, and scaling your product overseas. Whether you are just starting out or you've been making your own product for a while, we are here to help women source products overseas without the overwhelm.
In each episode, we'll share insider tips, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories to help you source more effectively, save time, and boost your profits. Duh! We know how hard it can be to juggle the ins and outs of product development, but don't worry, we've got your back.
So grab a cup of coffee, get comfy, and let's dive into how you can grow your business,
make more money,
and turn your products into profit. Welcome to
the Sourcing Gals. Now let's get started. High five.
Hi. Welcome to another episode of
the Sourcing Gals.
We are here today with a kind of a technical brain buster of a episode.
We're going back to school.
Yes.
We're going back to school, learning our letters and what the heck they mean when you are emailing your factories and talking about manufacturing.
Yes, because there are a lot of shorthand, acronyms, and stuff that people use. We have quite a list. I mean, so we're gonna get to it. I hope that that it's helpful, but you don't have to remember everything we're saying during this episode. We will also have a downloadable PDF in the show notes so that you can print it out, sit it on your desk, reference it, use it, feel like a total pro.
Yeah. And the factories are going to, on the other side, when they're receiving your emails, going to be like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, which is the whole point, is to set you up for success as you start these communications, start these emails, start the conversation so that you are in the driver's seat here.
I don't think that a factory would necessarily like take advantage of you if they thought you were a total newbie.
You don't think so?
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. My rose-colored glasses. But I do think that they would write you off.
Yeah.
They would just be like, this person's not serious. They're not like good, real business, like goodbye. So sounding profesh and knowing what you're talking about is important.
Correct. Agree.
All right. We're going to start out. Yeah. We're going to start out big with the number one. Number one is factory, FTY. So we use FTY.
FTY.
FTY as a shorthand for factory. Often I would say to my vendors, you know, hey, can we find an FTY that can produce a blah, 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 blah for me?
Correct. And the shorthand, again, it's just this lingo to get to the point faster. And so, yeah, that's what we're
It does not have to be capitalized.
Yep. It does not have to be capitalized.
Next, we're just going to like keep going. We're going to go down the thing. But there are some that we'll have a caveats on. But next is ODM or OEM. And this isn't a term that's used a lot in our world in terms of like corporate retail, but it is a term that's used a lot on Alibaba. So if you are someone who's finding a factory there, this is something I like to point out. An ODM is an original design manufacturer, which means they can customize a product on your behalf. And then OEM means original engineering manufacturer, which means that it's one step like further down the supply chain. They have the ability to actually like engineer something new on your behalf. You wouldn't necessarily see OEM if you're looking for like an apparel or something like that. It's more standard if you're looking for something that requires a lot of big machinery or molds. And so let's say like we'll use the flip-flops as an example. We use that one throughout, but the really big machines that press the flip-flops into their shapes, those are huge, very expensive, you know, multi-million-dollar machines. If you had a flip-flop manufacturer who said they were OEM, it would indicate that they owned those machines and used them on your behalf, not that they're outsourcing that to somebody else.
Great.
So that's important when working with Alibaba to make sure you're not getting a reseller or like a middleman who's just buying something from someone else and marking it up and selling it to you. Okay, next, SKU. SKU, you've probably seen this one before, but in our industry, we differentiate SKU from style because a style would be like an overarching fit. So let's say you have one style of a chino pant, and the SKU is each individual color. So I would you narrow it down even more to size? I speak of it in the like just above size but below style.
It depends. A lot of times we'll say size SKU. So I think within your email, you can determine how deep you want to go. But yeah, if you're talking about a style, it's usually one tech pack, which we'll get to what that means as well. But it's truly a style number. So that chino pant might have one style number, but then you get down to the SKU level is where I would add a color and a size at the end of it. So it's just one layer down, and then it can keep getting more granular.
And this is also important because each individual SKU, if in some products, like a mold would be used across your SKUs, or the same fabric would be used across your SKUs. So you can talk when you're speaking with the factory, FTY, you can speak at the SKU level, which hopefully can give you, a leg up when you're talking about MOQs, something like that, which we'll get to MOQs in a little bit. Let's move on next. TP is tech pack. We already talked about tech pack, but a tech pack is a technical specs. They are literally a technical packet or package that has sometimes multiple pages, sometimes one page. It gives all the measurements. It gives sometimes like a 3D view if you're making something that for which that's important. It gives the trims. It gives location of print or labels, all of the detail of your product.
And you can go as technical as you want in your tech pack. To be honest, we have customers that are choosing not only the color of thread, but the type of thread, a brand of thread that needs to be used for certain materials. So it gets down to the color placement of graphics if you're working in apparel or, accessories and things have a logo added to them. So it's really, I kind of consider it like the Bible of your product in a sense. Like it is the holy grail where everything that is going into your product is pulled together in a very digestible way that the factory understands.
And it's visual because
it's very visual.
A lot of times you are dealing with a factory whose English is not their first language, for whom English is not their first language. And they depend on those pictures and the diagrams to help digest.
And I also love with the tech pack, my factories and I will go back and forth. So I will send a technical packet, a TP, a tech pack to the factory. They make me a first sample. I get it back. We measure it. They will measure and send me the original tech pack and then what the actual garment measured against. And who knows, maybe we actually like the way the fit came in. We actually feel like the chest needs to be opened by 1/2 inch, or we like the body length that actually to be lengthened by 1 inch. So we go back into that original tech pack, we make those updates, and now all of a sudden it is a working document between us and the factory to keep all of the latest and greatest information. Your tech pack will most likely be a working document as you're going back and forth in the fit process, back and forth with comments on color and placement. And so then when the production is done, it truly is the holy grail, your standard of what everything should be measured against.
And even technicality, you might request something in your tech pack and the factory says, oh, well, our machineries, let's say it's like a seam, and based on the foot, the seam can't get within X, inches of the edge. So they'll make those call outs. And then it's best practice to update the tech pack every time you get one of those call outs, so that then when you get further down the process, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it's as accurate as humanly possible. It really is the gold standard when it comes to describing your product. So that's TP. And kind of on the shoulders of TP is BOM. BOM stands for Bill of Materials. Some tech packs have BOMs within them.
That's usually how we do it, to be honest. We have the BOM right inserted as another tab. If you imagine a tech pack as an Excel document of sorts, and you can have tabs within, we usually have the BOM within one of those tabs of our tech pack.
And so the BOM lists out all of the physical materials that are included in your product. If you are making, let's go back to like the chino example, it would have your cotton, it would have your thread, it would have your zipper, it would have your pocket lining fabric, it would have your button,
Sewn in your labels that are
sewn
probably
in
being sewn
labels.
in.
If you have any sort of like binding on the insides of your hem, or the insides of your seams, yeah, that's a good a hang tag. Sometimes people would put that on there, even down to interfacing. So something that you may not be able to see, but like in the waistband of a pair of chinos, maybe there's like a thicker piece of interfacing that's used to keep that band sturdy. That would also be on the tech pack, because that would also be hard to illustrate sometimes. So you put that on your bill of materials, like waistband should have X interfacing. I use interfacing a lot in appliques and stuff, but okay, so bill of materials. And I want to also say that when it comes to bill of materials, in my jewelry brands that I've worked with, we don't provide that in the beginning. We send out a design and the vendor sources the materials in the design. So the vendor will say, we want, let's say it's like a millefiori bead. It's like an Italian glass bead. We want to find some green, some aquas, and some blue millefiori beads. Like, let us know what exists. The vendor comes back and says, okay, we have all of these colors. And then they'll provide us with a cost sheet that breaks down the materials used. So in those cases, we don't provide the bill of materials. The vendor provides it after they've assembled the product for us, but it can go either way.
Great. It's awesome. Okay, we're moving on to FOB or LDP.
Onward and upward.
I probably say this word, I can't count how many times a day, but it's used in many different ways. But for you launching your product, it's something you're going to want to ask your factory. How are they going to be selling the goods to you? So let me explain what FOB is. It stands for freight on board. And what that means, if a vendor is an FOB vendor, you as the customer have to help bring the goods and import them into the country on your own, right? So they are going to literally finish the goods, sew them, get them made and packed and boxed up, and you are going to bring a freight forwarder, a 3PL of sorts. Someone's going to come in and you're going to be picking up the goods, technically either from the factory, usually it's from the port, it can be two ways, and bring the goods in yourself. Now, if your vendor is an LDP vendor, that means landed duty paid. We've done a lot of talk about duties recently. What that means is the vendor is actually going to import the goods on your behalf. So they're not only going to cut and sew and box, but they're going to ship and basically going to deliver it right to your front door or your distribution center or wherever, the goods are finishing up. So again, it's a way to ask the vendors in those beginning conversations, do you ship FOB? Do you ship LDP? What are the terms? And I will highly suggest, which we'll get into this in later episodes as well, but especially starting out, if you want to not have to worry as much about the customs and the importing and the logistics, an LDP vendor is a great partner to have. Someone that will do that work on your behalf and bring the goods all the way in to your front door.
Think of it like when you buy a piece of furniture from like West Elm or Restoration, and you get to choose like white glove delivery, and they bring it like into your house and set it up. Like that's like the LDP thing. Like it comes to your doorstep, which in this retail industry is kind of magic.
And I'll say, why would someone choose to go FOB? Couple reasons. Bigger retailers, they want control. They want to be able to know where their goods are at any time, at any point when the manufacturing process is done. So a lot of major retailers will choose to pick up the goods and use their own logistics partners to bring them in.
Also, if you're consolidating things, so if you have things from multiple factories and they have to be shipped together, then you'd want to consolidate them overseas, and therefore you would buy it FOB.
Exactly. So again, there's pros and cons for each for sure, but I would say as you're starting your product-based business and you're looking for ways to make things a little easier, if you can find a vendor that's either willing to do LDP, or there are some vendors that use a third party that they will introduce you to, and then that third party really does, again, a lot of the heavy lifting. They're working directly with your factory on your behalf. So LDP, landed duty paid.
Right? I'm going to just interject here, because that third party, it doesn't have to be someone scary. For some of my products that I've used that are smaller and that are pretty cheap to ship, I've just used like FedEx or UPS as my third party.
Correct.
So FedEx or UPS, they pick it up from the factory and they bring it to my doorstep. Now that is for, again, like they can do that for any type of product. Don't get me wrong. I have FedEx like stools from India and it was expensive.
Yes.
It's just going to be expensive.
Yep.
But that's why I say for some smaller goods, especially like accessories and jewelry, I have used UPS or FedEx as my third party, as the bridge between FOB and my doorstep. Just because they usually have like a US based customer service, and it's a little bit of peace of mind for me versus working with a huge freight forwarder who I'm like but a number.
Exactly. Okay, another big one, MOQ. You probably, if you've been on Alibaba, you will see that word MOQ.
If you've been on our podcast for any episode, I think we say MOQ every episode.
So minimum order quantity. So again, as you are talking with your factories, as you are vetting out who is going to be your best production partner, it is always beneficial to ask, what is your MOQ? Which literally means what is the smallest amount of units they are willing to make for you customized, right?
Sometimes it's one.
Yeah.
But you're going to pay a whole ton.
Exactly. So the MOQ, and a lot of times MOQ has a couple facets to it. There might be a fabric MOQ. So there's sometimes where they might not be able to answer you exactly until they know more about your product.
Correct.
Because if they're buying their fabric, most likely from a third-party mill, then that mill might have minimums for cotton versus cotton poly versus, plastic versus nylon, right? There's going to be different minimums from the fabric side. Also, I will tell you, when it comes to MOQs, a lot of vendors that do live in that smaller quantity space, it's usually because they have close ties to local markets. So if you literally imagine going to a local, maker's market in your town, right? And you're able to just buy onesie, twosies. There are literally fabric markets that exist in a lot of these manufacturing towns where they will sell 5 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters at a time. And almost like, old school, like New York downtown. If you guys ever go to the garment district, you can still go to Mood Fabric and buy apparel fabric by the meter. So a lot of these factories that are willing to work with lower MOQs are going to be using their own local resources to find you fabric. Now, the downside with that is the customization of it. You might have to make some concessions to get those smaller minimums, where if you're like, no, this has to be this color, this exact, weight, then you're probably going to have a higher MOQ, a higher minimum due to your fabric, less by your actual cut sew, which we'll also talk about.
So I'll give you just a little bit of an example of that. If you're making canvas totes, there are all types of canvas, colors of canvas that are just market available. You can go to the fabric market, you can buy 10 ounce natural or 10 ounce white or 10 ounce navy. It's not going to be your navy. It's going to be the whatever they have, but it is available.
Correct.
The more specialty your fabric gets. So think about, maybe I'll use the example of jeans. There's some denim that has no stretch. It is just off the shelf, standard denim. But then when you get into some of these elevated designer brands, and their denim has just this little hit of elastane and this little different weave that makes it stretch just the right way. They're custom making that denim. They're not finding it in the market. So if you have a product where the material itself isn't the shining star of your design, you can get lower MOQs because you can use something that's in the market.
And directing your factory, letting them know that is important, right? Tell them exactly what you're looking for. Where do you need the customization? Where do you need help? And there's also fabric mills out there that will run on lower minimums than others. So again, it's just making sure you're asking the right questions. And even if they come back saying one thing, it's okay to dig deeper.
Yes.
It's okay to say, hey, do you have an alternative mill that we can use? I'm okay to pay a little bit more.
But I need a lower MOQ.
So you can ask those questions back and forth. Okay, next, as you are chatting with your factories and you are going through all these questions and asking them a lot of different things, eventually you send them that technical packet and you start conversing, you're going to ask them for your FC, your first cost. That literally means the cost of the goods to make. So your FC will depend also on how your vendor is shipping it. Are they an FOB vendor? If so, they're going to give you a first cost based on the goods that you have to then pick up and import, and you're going to have to add all the extra increments, the transportation, the tariffs, the duty on the back end. Or if you're talking to an LDP vendor, then really first cost is almost the same thing as your landed cost. It's your final cost to get to you. So, just understanding how they're shipping to you is kind of your step one. And then they're basically going to come back with your either first cost, or they might even call it your LDP cost, your landed duty paid cost. So that's kind of the difference between those two.
Yeah. First cost is kind of like the itemized, like, I wouldn't say it's an itemized bill, but you're really seeing like the actual cost of the piece, no add-ins, no packaging, no freight, no anything.
So then if we talk about packaging and freight and all the other things that go into your cost, we're going to start talking about the word COGS, cost of goods sold. So this literally means your first cost, which is your cost to make the goods, plus your freight, plus your duty, plus your packaging, all of it rolled in together, and then literally multiply that cost by how many units you're buying. So it's really more of like your P&L when you're looking at how much total dollars am I spending on this one item times X number of units. So it's kind of like your operating budget in the sense of what it's costing you.
Correct. Like your vendor wouldn't use the phrase COGS.
Correct.
You would use that internally.
Correct. And then what's very important to also know as you launch your product is your IMU, also known as your initial markup. So we will also have this in the cheat sheet, the calculation, but it's really your margin as a seller, right? Like how are you going to sell this product to the customer, and what are you going to make? So again, not a term that you will use with your factory, but it is a very important piece of costing and understanding profits and margins with your business. So again, later podcast coming back with that, but just so you know, IMU is a very critical piece to your business as the operator of it.
Especially as you're getting your business started and you're talking with, let's say you are speaking with like a business coach, or you have like an investor, or you're building a business plan, your IMU becomes really important because you need to know, okay, here's approximately what I'm going to pay for my product. Here's approximately what I'm going to make. And what's that percentage?
Exactly. Okay. So let's keep going. Next, we are going to talk about.
Am I next?
Lead time. Kicking it over to you.
Lead time. Okay. So we're going through the product journey as we're using these acronyms. Again, I know we're moving fast. We are going to put the PDF, but next we move into, we've made the product, we've costed the product out, we've understood if it's going to be white glove delivery, LDP or FOB, but then we're going to start talking about timing with the vendor or the factory. And we talk about LT, which is lead time. The LT can be lead time for the fabric and the materials. It can be lead time for a mold. It can be lead time to actually make the good. It can be lead time for shipping. So you can always say shipping LT or material LT or production LT. I'll give an example of, let's say like a jewelry piece. One of my favorite bracelets I'm wearing today that Jackie had to put on for me because I can't do it myself. So this required a mold. The mold took 3 weeks to make. After the mold lead time, the mold LT, then it took another 2 weeks to make the pieces. So production LT and then assembly LT. Now, a lot of people don't get that granular, but just know that LT means lead time, and it can be applied to multiple facets of the timing and action plan, which brings us next to timing and action plan.
This is always a funny one that made me giggle.
It made me giggle too.
When I first heard it the first time. I mean, I'm a 22-year-old college grad, and they're talking about TNAs all over A&F, and I'm thinking
titties and ass.
I mean, right? Like that's what we know it as in college, but turns out it has a much different meaning in the manufacturing world.
Yeah, it means timing and action. Timing and action, and it is really a layout of all of your lead times back to back and the deliverables that you and your factory are signing up for. The TNA can be as short as, sending the tech pack out, getting the first sample, approving the sample, going into production finishes, shipping. Like that's pretty bare bones. A lot of the TNAs that I use for some of my businesses are like 30, 35 line items because they also include the amount of time for approval on both ends of the approval, especially if you're designing a product and you're selling it wholesale, or you're sending it to like a marketing team to get photographed. You would want to account for those things in your timing and action plan. So it is a written down timeline a plan of how you will execute the design, development, production, and shipping cycles.
And I think what you have to know about a TNA is that you set out on a plan, and many times the TNA will adjust. And sometimes
I don't think I've ever had a TNA like actually.
Sometimes it's okay, and sometimes, it's not as okay. It's depending on what a customer's expectation is of when goods are arriving. So just know that a TNA is basically like a domino. Like the first domino has to go and hit, and depending on when that hits, it checks the next domino and the next domino in regards to approvals, and then cutting, and then sewing, and then shipping, right? They're all connected, and that first domino has to fall first. And depending on when that is and how delayed it is, will really just become like a chain effect on the back end. So no, it is a fluid, again, we love to say we're going to start here and end here, but there's a lot that can happen in between. So just know that TNA, your factory will probably be constantly updating that as approvals change, as deadlines move, as sometimes it could be as simple as something gets delayed in FedEx. And so all of a sudden you were supposed to approve something last week. Now FedEx stuck in customs, you're getting it a week later.
Your timeline for approval.
So now they're going to come back and say, hi, Jackie, we've updated your TNA accordingly because now that approval that I was given has pushed out a week. Now, I say all this with also the caveat that it is also important to create these great relationships with your vendor so that when things like that do happen, sometimes they can do you a solid. Sometimes they will do you a favor. And especially if it was an error on the factory side, I'm almost always pushing back on any TNA delivery slides. Like if they had an issue and they had to rework a sample because of something that they found faulty, and they're then telling me my timing's going to adjust, I say, hey, like,
where can we make this up?
Where can we make this up? Where can we partner with you? I really need to keep my delivery, So just know that those are ebbs and flows and conversations that can go back and forth.
Yes. And that is a lot. We talked about a lot because we look at it from the perspective of our kind of like corporate history. But even with my own brands, I do a very rough TNA, which always includes I start and then work backward from NDC or X factory, which would be our next terms. So NDC, I don't know why we keep using N's in place of the word in, but NDC is like in DC, which means inside the distribution center. When your goods are going to land in your distribution center, which if you're a small business or if you're like me, that distribution center is my front porch. And so that is the date I typically start at and then work backward from. The next date up from that would be X factory. This is a very common term, X and then FTY. FTY, X factory is when the goods leave your factory. So when you're working on your timing and action plan, you can determine, okay, if the goods leave the factory here and the goods are NDC in my distribution center here, that means shipping is this long. If you have an LDP product and the vendor is landing it for you, and you might just talk NDC. You probably wouldn't know X factory. So those are two important terms. I think that, do all brands use NDC that you've worked with?
I have also heard of GAC, which is Goods at Consolidator, which is another form of X factory in a sense. I know it's one brand that we work with, but again, their freight forwarder is then talking NDC to them, not us as the vendor.
One of the brands I worked with is a pretty big brand, and I said NDC, and they all looked at me like I had 10 heads.
Interesting. For the most part, it seems like a pretty universal term with people that I've worked with.
Okay, so NDC. We'll use it. We'll use it here. We'll make it a thing. Okay, next is CM. CM stands for cut make. Cut make is when you separate the cost of the materials and the cost to assemble or sew the materials together. This was most commonly used in my past when I worked in leather goods, because I would buy the leather from Italy. I would pay the Italian factory for the leather. I would have the leather then shipped to, at that time it was Brazil, and Brazil would sew them into a sandal or a flip-flop or a handbag for me. So I'm paying those two things separately. So I have the fabric cost or the leather cost, and then I have the CM cut make. So really the factory in Brazil is only charging me for the cutting the leather and making it into the final product, CM cut make. This also is a little bit more common in very, very high end like couture, because a lot of those fabrics are bought in like Europe and then they're shipped elsewhere for their cut make. And then that brings us to YY, which is yield. I don't know why there are two Ys.
I don't know either. Probably just so that you know it's not a spelling, like a finger slip. So it's like purple.
YY.
So the way I look at yield is, imagine you are a baker and you're making sugar cookies and you roll out your dough and you're trying to figure out how many cookies can you make out of that rolled piece of dough, right? And you're putting your cookie cutters up into each other and trying to basically get the best yield, the most cookies for that dough. A factory does the exact same thing with your fabric. They're going to roll out your fabric and lay out something called markers, and literally your pattern pieces. And they used to do it very old school. Now there's computer systems that do this for them. So it'll literally take your pattern pieces and it will digitize them and lay it out so the factory knows the most efficient way to cut your pattern pieces to give you the best yield, the least amount of wastage, because when you have high wastage, it affects your cost. You can just imagine if every time a baker had to throw out literally the dough that was not used, that's basically what happens with fabric for the most part, right? Whatever pieces they can't cut out, it's very hard to reuse that remnant fabric left over. So you want your factory to be using great markers, giving the most pattern pieces per meter or whatever the unit of measurement is of that fabric, so you have the best yield and the lowest cost. So that's kind of a rough analogy if you can think about it that way.
Yes, yes. And then there are ways that your yield will be affected, especially if you think of sometimes like, I don't know, we're both wearing jeans, so I'll use the jeans as an example, but your fabric weave always goes in one direction.
Correct.
So you, of course, can't cut your jeans like this.
Erin is doing a little jive over here for those listening.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. If you're not watching the video, I'm just like, you can't just willy-nilly the markers sometimes. They have to go in a specific direction because the weave of the fabric, the grain of the fabric has to go in a specific direction.
Yep.
So that's something to take into account too.
Definitely.
So, Jackie, what's next?
Okay. So you've talked with your factory, you've figured out the minimums, you've gotten through your cost, you're going through your timing and action, and you're understanding your cut make, and now you're ready to place an order. So we call that a PO, a purchase order, which you've probably heard the word purchase order before, but really PO is the acronym, the shorthand for that. And that will literally be a document that you will send to your factory that's going to outline the cost of goods, how many units you're buying, your information, the factory information, the deliverables. It's basically your contract before you go into production. So you do not really want to hand over that PO until you're feeling really good about what you have. You've landed on a price, you've landed on your units, you know what you're buying. And that's really the formal contract that you would email your factory and say, okay, here's our contract. Here's a mutually signed agreement, basically telling you all the things that you guys have been working on throughout the conversation, throughout the development process.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you that we did not talk about before.
Okay, love it.
Related to PO, PI. Do you work with PIs at all?
We do.
So pro forma invoice.
Yes.
The first time someone said that to me, I was like, I'm sorry, what? Come again?
Yep.
So that's more of a legally binding document for freight, right?
Well, pro forma invoice for us is actually a deposit down. So we, again, maybe not legal, I am not sure, but the way that when our vendors send us a PI, it literally means a deposit. So we have issued them a purchase order for X number of goods times this many units. They're usually sending me back a PI, a pro forma invoice that says, okay, in order to produce this purchase order, we are requesting that you pay 30% down, 50% down. And so we are constantly transferring money back and forth with our factories pre-production. So we've gotten to a place where we've had a mutually agreed upon sample and pricing, but then for them to actually start the work, they're sending us a PI that will wire them money to actually get going in production. So that's the term that we use, at least in-house, for PI.
I think about it sometimes as like the bill. So if you go to a restaurant, you place an order, which is like your PO, you place your order. But then at the end of the meal, you get the bill. So you have to pay. So your order is initiated by you, your PO. It's telling the vendor what you want to buy from them. And then they'll bill you for it, essentially, which is the PI. Not every factory I've worked with has worked with PIs. Sometimes they'll just send me like, I'll send them the PO and then I'll just wire the money and that's the end. But some do say PI. So heads up, if they send it to you, that's what they're saying. You need to pay them.
Yeah. And a lot of times you just know that deposits down are not uncommon.
No, they're not.
Especially when you're starting new with a factory. That is something you can build over time to say, hey, you know, I'm good for it. You've proven enough track record that you've paid them on time in full enough for them to build confidence in you and your product and your business. But just know that most likely you might get 2 PIs. What I was talking about first is your deposit down, and then the second would be the balance upon that's due usually when your goods arrive in the country.
And paying a deposit is also a lot more common in precious metals and goods that I've worked with in jewelry because the cost of gold fluctuates so much, the cost of silver, even the cost of brass and zinc somewhat, but not as much. So if you want to lock in the price of that gold, you would pay the deposit equal to the price of gold so that the vendor can buy the gold on your behalf.
Got it. Interesting. Love learning jewelry things from you all the time.
Yeah.
So next, you've placed your purchase order, you've gotten into your sample process, you've gone back and forth, and you really got into a final place that you're going to be reviewing something called your PP, which is your pre-production sample. So basically, a PP should be all of your correct raw materials. So the fabric that you had to order or the beads the factory had to purchase. They're going to send you what should be as close to the perfect sample that you can get. Now, they're going to be sewing or making this sample in a sample room, to be fair. So it will not be from the bulk production line, but it should be using every single component down to your labels, down to the way in which you want it packaged. If that's in a clear poly bag with a sticker on it of style number, if that is in a carded, if it's a jewelry piece and it's in a box, like every single component of how it should be arriving to you will come as your PP sample, your pre-production sample. That is what truly gives the factory the green light go to move into bulk production. They're going to take your sample from being made in a sample room with your bulk materials and put it to a bulk production line to be mass manufactured. So your PP, I would say, is your most important sample aside from then your top of production, which will come next. But that PP needs to be perfect. Now, I will say sometimes, depending on your factory, your comfortability, your TNA, your timeline, sometimes you have to CNP after you review a PP sample. Let me tell you what that means. Correct and proceed. So I will give an example of, I had an item that we got our PP sample for. Everything was perfect except the label was a 1/2 inch lower than where it needed to be. We were on a very tight timeline. So I allowed the factory to CNP, correct and proceed, with adjusting the label back up by 1/2 inch, and I had them send me a photo for reference. So all of a sudden, I went from a 1 day, they had to remake a sample, send me a photo for approval, versus sew me a whole new sample, get it in the mail, get it in my hand. Like, we saved weeks by just being able to CNP, correct and proceed, again with a photo for reference.
At my last company, we CNP'd all the time. It was mostly CNP. But one thing I was going to note about the PP is that a lot of times when the vendor or the factory makes the PP, they'll make several. They'll make 5, 6, 7 of them. And then when you approve it, those 5, 6, 7, those are what get distributed to their production lines as the perfect point of reference. A lot of times when I go to factory, I'll see the PP inside of like a Ziploc bag for protection, like up on a cork board at the front of the line, so that if anybody needs to reference it because they have a question about how it's supposed to look, that's their reference sample.
Exactly. So then once you actually approve the PP sample, which again is kind of that gold standard, right? You've got everything perfect. The factory proceeds to bulk production. Once they start that bulk production, at the very tail end of production, you are going to receive what is called a TOP. Literally stands for top of production. Now, in theory, these are the first goods off of the line as they're being completed. So let's say you're sewing 500 sweatshirts. You've got your perfect PP sample. You've given approval. That next day, the factory is setting up the sewing lines. they're going one by one by one, right? One person does the body, one person does the sleeve, one person does the rib. Then you go to the screen print facility and they're going to screen print the front of it. That first, second, third, 10th sample off the line will be sent in the mail to you to review and approve. The goal or theory, especially when you're talking mass manufacturing, is that your TOP should come in theory before all of production is done. So if God forbid something happens, something looks wonky, you're able to raise a red flag and say, literally halt the presses. Something is going awry within bulk production, right? Now, again, the times that has happened to me are rare. It does happen, but it is luckily more on the rare side than not. So that top of production should truly be reflective of your bulk product, what your customer is going to get at the end of the day.
Typically, when I've had a correction at the TOP stage, it is with something like the label or the hang tag,
how they're packaging,
how they folded it, which is easy to change. It might cost you a couple days, but it's easier to change. It's typically not like your base fabric or your base material because you've already seen that at PP.
Correct. So what's important about your TOP, though, is that your vendor is not technically allowed to ship you the goods until you have approved your TOP sample, your top of production sample. So you want to make sure that you treat both the PP and your TOP like with the utmost respect. Know that timing is critical, but every detail is critical. So take your time also to make sure you're checking every single thing. If you have a very technically driven item, this would be a time when you would actually bring in a technical designer potentially, or someone who knows how to measure, that's really being your partner to make sure that in bulk production, your goods are reflecting what you set out to
That's when I get out my calipers.
There you go. Exactly. So that would be your TOP. Now, part of this as well that your factory might talk to you about, and if they don't, I would highly recommend you talk to them about it, is their QA QC process, quality assurance, quality checkpoints. So if you can think about this sweatshirt, like I mentioned, there are probably going to realistically be 6 or 7 people on the production line that will just touch a sweatshirt being made. Everyone becomes a very, very narrowed in on one operation, the neckband, the rib neckband to the top of the sweatshirt. There's someone who's just sewing the sleeves on, who's just doing the bottom opening. So all along that step, if you think about how many truly humans are touching the product, there's a lot of opportunity for something to go wrong. So most factories have quality checkpoints throughout their production line, as well as at the very end of production. You want them to do some type of audit for you, some qualities check. So we usually call it a QA QC, and it's like QA with a hyphen QC. And you can ask them, what are your QA QC guidelines? What will I be receiving to ensure that at the end of the day, yes, they can always pick a perfect TOP to send you, right?
Yes.
But what does the balance of bulk look like? So we're usually requesting some type of audit, some type of quality assurance, quality checkpoint material. Literally, like they're going to send you an Excel chart that says we audited this many units, we found this many errors, and know that those errors, this is a human-made, for most products, human-made products. There's going to be some things that fall out of maybe the target that you sent. And then it's understanding you as an owner of the business, can you accept the goods, right? So they should be able to give you some guardrails and guidelines to say, how did actual bulk production execute to your plan? So make sure you're asking them about what they come to you with, what they're offering. And sometimes you can even bring in a third party if you want someone to QA QC.
That's like
your
much
goods.
Bigger, you'd be a pretty big brand at that point in time to kind of bring in like your own third party. But I'll give a real world example of something that happened to me recently is that actually the necklace I'm wearing, one of my jewelry brands, the hole for the bead of the necklace, we got the PPs, they looked great. TOPs looked great. When I got bulk, the holes were too small. So they wouldn't go on the chains. And it was just missed. It was actually like the holes weren't too small. It was like the holes were just a little bit irregular. So there might be a piece inside one that like caught on the chain. So they ended up, because they're like a high quality silver with gold, we ended up shipping them back. They re-drilled the holes and shipped them back, but they covered that cost for me. And luckily it was a small order. So it was not a huge undertaking. And I kept all the good ones on my side to get going with sales in the meantime. But that was just something that, they didn't check enough in the process to make sure they actually fit on the chain.
And I will say a lot of the pain points I hear from people that have started product-based businesses that are, vetting out factories that they're not really sure about with, whatever channels, Alibaba, whatnot. A lot of the pain points come at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
It's I got the goods and the quality just wasn't there, right? So these are all the reasons why you need to ask for these checkpoints along the way and ask for photos. We request photos all the time from our factory. Showed me, proved to me that this is looking the way that we talked about. So again, don't ever be afraid to ask your factory for more information.
Absolutely.
They are there to help service you, to make you feel like the best product coming in reflects what you set out to do. And then ideally, usually vendors are not asking for their balance payment until you've actually received the goods and inspected them yourself. So if a vendor starts pushing you to send your balance payment, your PI, before you've actually received the bulk goods, I would put pause to it, because all of a sudden then they are back in the driver's seat with your money. And if something does come in and it isn't to the standard that you approved and that you agreed upon, the ramifications are a lot harder when they already have your funds.
Yeah, we could probably have a whole episode on this, but you should negotiate some sort of, let's say, week. You can do 7 days, 7 days from receipt of goods for you to have enough time to review and ensure that they are accurate, and then you pay your balance bill.
Correct.
That's where I caught my issue.
Exactly. So it's perfect. Really important. So, okay, that is the end of our lengthy acronym list. And I know that was a lot, and you probably need to re-listen to this a few times, to be honest. But
Fast and Furious.
We will have the cheat sheet below. Just know that we are empowering you with the tools to be able to just be that much more knowledgeable as you're having these conversations, that much more confident to really own those conversations and know the right questions to ask.
And maybe a decoder. If a factory emails you and they're using a lot of these acronyms, you can just be like, what does this mean? Yep. And go down the PDF and determine, and then you'll learn over time, and then it'll become second nature.
Yeah. Okay, well, my brain's spent. I think I'm ready for a cocktail now. School's out.
We are in the wine room. So
yes, this is very fitting. So, well, thank you all for listening, and hope you learned, I'm sure, quite a few things today.
Probably more than you bargained for, to be quite honest.
Bargained for, but we hope to see you back for a next episode of
The Sourcing Gals.